Hey everyone, welcome to On the DL podcast with Papes and Lucky. We have our second guest with us right now, and we are super excited to talk about what we're going to talk about on the podcast. Danielle, if you want to go ahead.
All right, so on today's episode, we have Ashley. She's currently active duty, and just like we've said before, your stories can be private, and she chose to change her name just for those reasons. So she's going to talk to us about different types of training and helping be the change with the culture. So here is Ashley.
Hi, everyone. A little background about me. I'm a first-class petty officer, and I've been in the Navy for 12 years. And I was a victim advocate for about 3 years. And I also just got my recertification. So I've been through a lot of the training programs, even back when it was SAVI instead of SAPR, which is Sexual Assault Prevention and Response. Today, I kind of just wanted to talk to you about some of the ideas that I've gotten from several social media polls and research that I've done listening to women's stories and some of the cases that I've experienced myself. One of the big things that everyone agreed upon was that we think that all E7 and above, as well as officers, should go through victim advocate training, be that in whatever branch of service they may be in. That way they can understand the programs properly, because I've come to find out that especially males who are in these positions of authority don't understand exactly how the program works. And somehow through them maybe trying to do the right thing or just not understanding how it works, they've completely blown cases and made victims feel like they would never want to come forward again. Another thing was that I heard and saw and read a lot of stories about women being mistreated in boot camp, and also just not even remembering their sexual assault training from boot camp. So another thing that I suggested, which a lot of people agreed upon, was that when you're in boot camp, you have all this stuff just crammed into your head and you're exhausted and you're more worried about learning your general orders and your chain of command and things like that. So when they throw a PowerPoint in front of you, you kind of zone out and you're basically sleeping with your eyes open. So maybe in boot camp and basic training, they should think about when they come up and they're asking you these questions like, what's General Order number 6? Or who's the Chief of Naval Personnel? Maybe they should also be asking questions such as, what are your reporting options for sexual assault? Who can you speak to get a restricted report or unrestricted report in boot camp? And that way it's more ingrained in your head. Because honestly, I think that that's more important than knowing whoever, whatever admiral is that you'll probably never meet. I mean, that's important as well to know your chain of command, but I think it's also important to know this stuff. And if that was more ingrained with these questions that they ask you in boot camp, it could really help people realize that it's a serious program and there are options out there for people.
That's super brilliant. I completely forgot about how in boot camp we were asked, who's the MECPON? Who's the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy? Who is this person? Those questions are, sure, they're important, but they have nothing to do with your direct experience. The chances of you meeting that person are slim to none, and they're not in your direct chain of command. I had never thought of it that way. And it's so funny that you brought that up, because I completely forgot that was even something that we did in boot camp.
It's probably going to change 3 or 4 times from boot camp at the point that you meet the MCPON,
Right.
Starting jobs as civilians, you do sexual assault training and you go through human resources and everything as part of before you can even start doing your actual job. So it's really interesting that you're right. Like, we absolutely did not do anything like that when we were in boot camp. And the military, especially, it's such an integrated, newly integrated job in theory, that it's crazy we never did anything like that. Because these guys, some of them, it was the first time they were ever around females.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I grew up doing construction, so I was always used to being around a bunch of guys, and I was used to being objectified or being told that I had to pull my weight, and knowing that I had to outwork the guys and lift more lumber than they did and things like that. So I was kind of used to it, and the guys that I was around were used to me not taking any flack from them. So when I came into the Navy and I just rolled in and came in as the toughest person I could come in as, but I still had to really establish that respect from people. And you could tell that there were certain males and even females that had never worked in this type of environment. Honestly, I really don't think a lot of it comes from a place of being malicious. I think it's just a complete lack of understanding on how to act.
It's funny that your experience is different from my experience. Like you say that you were actually already exposed to the all male workforce. My experience is completely different because the Navy was my first job. So when I got out of the Navy, I did a bunch of different jobs, but the first job that I took was as a massage therapist. And, you know, a lot of massage therapists are females, very few men. So I recently got a job probably in the last year and a half where I am a federal sales manager at a firearms range in the city that I'm located in, and I was hired on as part of the leadership team, which is 6 other men that are in their mid 30s to 60s. And when I got hired on for that position, I had the worst anxiety. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I took this job. This is going to be the Navy all over again, and I don't know what to do." And I have not experienced one moment where somebody said something to me that was inappropriate. Nobody's tried to make me feel uncomfortable. Nobody's tried to belittle me because I'm, you know, in a leadership role. And it's such a different experience for me. And it's not anything like what I thought it was going to be because of my experience that I had in the Navy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations on that job. And I'm so glad that they're treating you well. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it's insane to me the different experiences that we can have and then how much anxiety you can hold just based off of what you think that you know. But yeah, do you have any other suggestions for that kind of training? Like, did you dig in deeper into like maybe what we should be doing that's different in the fleet?
I think that some of the stuff is, I mean, a lot of this training is so cookie cutter, and it's
For
PowerPoint.
sure.
And whenever people go in and they do their GMT trainings, or we do 101 days of summer or holiday stand down, whatever, any kind of this, you go into the theater, you go into some room and they throw a PowerPoint up there and you're listening to people say, don't hit your spouses or children when you come back from deployment. Don't rape people, don't sexually assault or harass people. It all just bleeds into this like cookie cutter generic presentation that, I mean, even for me, I really try to pay attention to it and I'm zoning out because the person that's up there, for one, usually isn't passionate about it. And it's not real world experiences. They show statistics of one in however many women in the military are sexually assaulted, one in however many men in the military are sexually assaulted. And it goes into all this stuff that's not cohesive to a good learning environment, especially when you have so many different backgrounds and cultures of people. It needs to be, well, for one, we need to change certain things in the instructions. I mean, the military has a different definition of rape than the federal law does. That needs to change. There's so many things that need to change about the program, but as far as the training goes, commands are not required to have a SARC, which is the sexual assault response coordinator, because every base has one, or a victim's legal counsel who is a JAG and knows about this stuff. Like, they are not required to have these people do their training. They can do in-house training, so they can simply have a victim advocate that just went through a 1-week class go up there and give this PowerPoint training. And that's not the way it should be, because you could have an E4 that could be super passionate about the subject, but maybe isn't the best at public speaking or isn't used to training people. So I think that it should be a requirement for commands to have these experts come in and do the training.
I agree. Can we first I have two questions. First, can we backtrack to what you meant when you said that our definition in the Navy of sexual harassment or assault is different from federal definition?
So I dug into it because I read an article that basically said I don't remember what branch he was in, but this guy basically got acquitted for raping his daughter because of a statute of limitations because it was over 5 years ago. So there was that. And then it said in there that I think the article was a little bit misleading because I dug into it, but it said in there in this article that the military's definition of rape has to do with penetration, oral, anally, or vaginally, and that person has to be in fear of their life and with threats of death. And I was like, there is no way that's true. So I looked it up and I found the UCMJ article, and it could be misconstrued to say that it's not necessarily rape unless that person feels like they are threatened with their life. So if somebody said, well, they didn't fight back, all of the other BS excuses that people make, just the way that it's worded in the UCMJ is not very black and white. There's room for interpretation there.
Right. I agree with that 100%. And my second question was, so we're talking about training, right? And a lot of the training that I went through, at least, if your training was different than mine, by all means, feel free to say so. But a lot of my training on sexual assault, I didn't get much training on sexual harassment. A lot of the training that I got was on sexual assault. And I was just talking in the previous episode that we did, there is a line that a woman says, okay, this is the line that is deemed inappropriate past this point, right? So if tiny comments don't cross that line, she's like, okay, well, he didn't touch me, so that's fine. And then it goes to, it gets just a little bit more and more intense.
Yeah,
And
escalate.
I don't think a lot of them go from, I know there are cases where it goes straight to sexual assault, don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of them, if not a majority of them, start with those tiny little like
Insidious.
comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, to see to like test the waters basically. They're testing the waters, and I don't think there's enough training where we say, "Hey, telling somebody that they look good in coveralls is not fucking appropriate." They're here to work just like you are. If you're not talking about work, don't talk about it. Like, it's that simple.
I completely agree with you on that. Sorry, did you have something you were going to?
No, and that's my biggest thing that I want to let every woman know. I think that's my biggest intention here, is that I understand the line because I made one too, and it was the reason that my situations got as bad as they did is because I just kept shifting the line over, because if this thing was okay, then the thing that's a little bit worse is okay, as long as it doesn't get to this point. And then all of a sudden, we've way crossed the line that was the original line. And now I'm like, well, what do I do now? Because now I feel like I've instigated this thing, or I've let it get out of hand. And that's not the outlook that we should have. These people should not have even said those things or done those things for it to get to this point. And I think there needs to be training on those things.
Yeah, absolutely. The standing up for yourself. I mean, so for me, something that I struggled with for a long time, and I'm just recently, now that Vanessa's story has come out and become so powerful, and this movement has become so huge, for me, I was really reflecting on, especially after that retired lieutenant colonel who's a lecturer at University of
Yes.
Wisconsin said what she said. And I thought back to it, and I was like, when I was in E3, E4, I was a little bit older when I joined, and a lot of people looked up to me, but I participated in the locker room talk, and I said things to these girls saying, you're either going to be a bitch or a whore, and I would say, be a bitch, because for whatever reasons, and I felt like I had to fit in with this group of hardcore military guys, especially, when you go to Afghanistan twice within your first year, it's a tough environment. And I allowed people to make comments to me, and I would make comments back at them, and I participated in that kind of stuff. And looking back, I'm so ashamed of the comments that I made.
What would you say now if you were in that exact position now? What would you change about your dialogue where you said, you're either a bitch or a whore, so be a bitch? Like, would you change the dialogue at all? Because I feel like you should just be who you are, and people should respect you. And it shouldn't be, I have to pick this attitude or else this happens.
Absolutely. So I met some junior sailors, well, and airmen as well, and they had just joined. They were in A school, and I met one of them, and she was telling me it was really difficult because she had very little female leadership. And I gave her my phone number and told her to call me or text me if she had issues or if she just needed to talk about anything. And I found out there was some messed up stuff going on, and I went and I met with 6 of these females, and the stories that they told me about being afraid to leave their rooms and because of the sexual assault and harassment. And I just told them, I didn't even bring that up. I said, you are a human being and you deserve respect. You deserve respect, and you do not deserve to feel unsafe at work or feel like you have to comply with this type of behavior or feed into this type of behavior. If you're uncomfortable for a reason. And even if people think that it's ridiculous or you're being too sensitive, then fuck them. It doesn't matter what they think.
Oh,
So that's
preach.
what I told them. I said, you can, because one of the girls asked me, she said, do I just have to be mean to everybody? And I said, no, you don't. You can, I said, you'll learn your own way to deal with this stuff. But I mean, call people out when they say things. Just say, what do you mean by that? Or they say it's just a joke and say, explain to me how that's funny. I don't think that's funny. And then coming at it that way, because, one of the girls told me, she said, I heard that you have to be a bitch thing. And I said, absolutely not. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the way people view the feminist movement is that you have these crazy people who get so triggered and so angry with people that they're not willing to sit there and have a conversation. So sitting there saying, I really don't like those types of comments. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't make them, especially around anybody, honestly. And I explained to them, I say, that's against our equal opportunity policy. And it might not make me uncomfortable, but if you're saying this in front of someone else, it might make them uncomfortable. So just try to keep things professional in the workplace.
Oh man, I totally agree with that. And I'm glad that I was able to actually have that conversation with you because that is something that I really I had conversations like that after my first command. That because I felt in that moment that there had to be a decision that you made. You're either friendly, which I feel, I mean, you seem very friendly. Do I think you're flirting with me? Absolutely not. So it's like I totally came from that perspective too, and I fed into that, like, well, if I'm on this side of the spectrum and that's not working, then I obviously need to go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, and maybe then I'll get some respect. And in either end of the spectrum, you receive zero respect. It's a lose-lose situation for us, and the reason it is because it was not made to protect us. Like the Navy existed far before we were born, and will exist long after us. So the kind of way that it molded into things is Papes touched on this on the last episode too, is like it's like what constantly gets assumed is okay, or if it works on certain people, then it just kind of becomes a habit throughout, and it becomes the climate of where you are. So if things kind of get left unsaid at a command that you're at and things just get swept under the rug, then that becomes the climate that you're in, and it has nothing to do with how friendly you are or how mean you are or how unapproachable you are. And that's I don't think there's anything that women need to do to be themselves. I think this needs to be training for the people who literally do not understand what's not appropriate.
I agree, but I'll disagree a little on that, is that it does need to be training for us because we need to understand that we don't have to act a different way. Yeah, I mean, maybe you grew up without much military bearing or respect for authority or anything like that. Obviously, like, we have to have that, but like, we as women need to realize our worth, and we need to realize that we don't have to put a different face on, that we can be who we are. You do have to be tough in this environment, and you might have to be a little tougher than you're used to, but just because you're sensitive to these issues and have a certain sensibility about you doesn't mean that you're weak. And I think that that's very, very highly misperceived. And I think that if we were just empowered especially if you think about some of these young girls who went to their chief in A school or in boot camp, and that chief laughed off their equal opportunity or sexual assault complaint. Then they think they have 0 people to go to. But I think it's so important for us, especially, you know, with what's going on right now, we're creating a network of resources that I'm going to put it out there right now. You know, I am here for anyone. I don't care if it's not in my command. I don't care if they're in a different branch. I will get the resources that you need. And there are so many people out there who will listen and who will be allies for you. So you can't let those, as hard as it is, we can't let those few people who we trusted and who let us down completely shape our view of how we should be treated.
Right.
Well, there were different situations so Lucky and I were on the same ship, and there were people in the chain of command. We would be on deployment, and I got to the ship, and 2 days later we left for months. And her and I would be Liberty buddies, and I like vividly remember guys from the ship thinking because we were in civilian clothes that they could talk to us in a totally different tone and like say sexual things to us, and it would be higher ranking. I like specifically remember like one of the most disgusting chiefs I've ever come across, and he would talk. He asked me if I shaved my vagina. Why is that appropriate to you? I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense. But then you say something to one of the other chiefs, and because it's their friend or whatever, they don't want to get their friend in trouble. So then they twist it and you get in trouble. And when you get in trouble for it, then it becomes more of like, oh, well, she's a shit starter and she's just trying to like get all these other people in trouble because she doesn't like this chief or whatever. And I mean, and then I've heard well, at least you're pretty enough for somebody to want to fuck.
Oh my God.
To add on to that, like, there was a specific time where we had pulled into a port that we couldn't go anywhere for, so we did beer on the pier. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Ashley, but so we pulled into somewhere where we couldn't go off base or even leave the pier that we were attached to. So we got beer, I think that was on our ship that we pulled off the ship. And we just basically kind of had like a barbecue outside for the whole command, and people got more drunk than they should have, and Papes and I were standing next to each other, and a chief, I think he was a chief or a senior chief, that came up to me and he said, "Lucky, you have the prettiest eyes. You know that?" And I was like, "Oh, thank you, chief." And it's like,
God, I remember.
yeah, and I was like, "Oh God." I was like, "Thank you, chief," because what do you say? And then he said, "You know what would make them even prettier?" And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "If there were jizz in them."
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, and there was a chief standing next to, it was a female chief actually, and she heard him say that, knew he was drunk, and had to carry him away from me. She was like, "Okay, that's enough," and like walked him away. But that, I knew that she knew, and there was nothing said about it. Nothing. There was
Gosh.
no counseling for him. I'm sure maybe she said something to him in private, maybe, but there was no addressing of it, which kind of brings me back to my point. Hopefully you didn't understand what I was saying. Like, I think that the training needs to start. I know that we should obviously be able to stick up for ourselves, and we should have that kind of feeling of worth to be able to say, "Hey, that's not okay." But I think the problem that I am so fixated on is the fact that they think it's okay in the first place. That needs to be trained. Like, those comments are what start the whirlwind of, inappropriate things that happen that only get worse from there. And that, gosh, I didn't remember that happened, Papes, until you brought up that comment that you
Yeah,
just brought up.
I remember that, and it was just our first ship too, and there weren't many females. And my chief, who was like my mentor, is probably the only reason why I made it off of that ship like successfully, because it's so easy to just like go in a downward spiral when you start like letting people say what they like. Lucky and I would use, I mean, I guess in a sense, like we'd use humor to try to get people to think of us as like one of the guys, which we shouldn't have had to do. And
No.
they would ask like, I mean, the questions that guys ask when they're like, oh, do all the girls like fuck each other in birthing? Is it just like a big porn? What? Like, no. And then we'd have to, I mean, we were 19, we were super immature. So our responses would be so dumb about like fucking their dads. And I mean, but it was like, why did that even happen? And it wasn't just 19-year-old guys saying that to us, it was people who had been in the military for years. And that I remember when my chief, she said, something you have to remember and remind yourself is that when if somebody comes on the ship, they're 18 years old, and there's somebody who's 40 years old and they've been on a ship their whole career. Other people are still young and they keep getting older, but they still act the same age as those 18-year-olds and they never grow the fuck up.
That's so true. And yeah, like I totally agree with what you're saying. Because my first deployment, my OIC came up to me, and I was one of two females on a camp of 300 dudes. And he came up to me and he slid his hand up my inner thigh and told me that he wrote my evals and he could write me a really good eval or a really bad eval. And I was just like, I have to go. And like I said, I was a little older when I joined. So I was like, had learned a little bit more, not even very much, but a little bit more how to draw those lines, I guess, or not even draw lines because I just walked away. But then we finished our work there and I went to a different debt site and I had a female first class as my OIC and she sat me down and said, look, you're really pretty. No one's going to take you seriously. So suck and fuck your way to the top like I did. And I was like, I've been in the Navy for 6 months and this female was telling me this. And I was just, at the time when you're a young E3, E4, you have no clue. Like you just think that that's normal. And like you said, you use humor to laugh it off. But yeah, there's no way that any of these comments should even be made, that we should even have to draw lines. Like, just keep it professional in the workplace.
I was so glad that you brought up the OIC and the eval thing. When I read that on your email, I was like, gosh, I hope she talks about this because a lot of my issues came from my direct chain of command. And I felt helpless because of that. And I think it's pretty common that the issues kind of fall on the direct chain of commands anyway. Like, I don't know, I'm really glad that you brought that up because I've experienced similar things happen to me, not so much eval related, but like a first class telling me that my perception on the ship of like what people think about me is going to be based on his, what he says about me. And so I better do what he thinks that I should do so that I get the right light shed on me. And it was a very, very like crippling place to be in,
Yeah, that
honestly.
abuse of power is everywhere and it's still around. And I mean, because I got involved with these girls who were in A school and I set them up with appointments to report their sexual assaults and an appointment to report their sexual harassment. And they ended up filing reports. And then their command master chief called my command master chief and told him I was buying underage girls alcohol and I was pulling girls out of class in A school, like all this crazy shit. And I was just like, you're making me out to be the bad guy for explaining how the Simeo and Sapper programs work and who they can go to when they're being abused. And it's my fault and I did something wrong. Yeah, I mean, it's insane to me. And I think back about all that kind of stuff. Like I made second class in 2 years, which is pretty fast for my rate. And of course, everyone said, oh, you're just under chief's desk and you sucked this first class's dick to get a good eval and all that stuff. And it really just brings you down and it takes your self-worth down. So you start to think that you deserve those kind of comments almost, and that it's just
Right.
normalized. And like you said, it escalates. It starts with those little comments, and that's what escalates into inappropriate touching and escalates into rape and in some cases murder.
Right. Well,
And
Ashley, is there anything that you want to touch on? I really would. I know I said this before we started recording, but I really would like to have you on again. I kind of want to know your experiences of being a victim advocate, and not so much like what experiences you've had with girls coming to you, but like what your experience was being a victim advocate and how easy it was to navigate that kind of program.
yeah, absolutely. I guess I would love to come back on. I guess the one thing that I would like to touch on here, which a little bit of background about me, I have been sexually assaulted by a family member. I was raped prior to the military. I was raped in the military, and countless sexual assaults and harassments. And I was in a really bad place at one point. I was suicidal. I was cutting myself. I was drinking a fifth of whiskey a night by myself. I thought it was normal to black out 4 nights a week. I was hypersexual. I was sleeping with everybody because I wanted to take back that control. And I went to Fleet and Family Services, and I went to a year of therapy, and it didn't work for me. And I finally found a non-traditional therapy that was free from military and veterans. And I went there, and it helped a little bit. But I remember one day just waking up, and I just woke up and I burst into tears because I had horrible nightmares. And I thought, I'm so sick of this. I'm over it, but I don't want to end it. First of all, I was just thinking about my mom and how devastated that would make her. But I made a conscious decision to heal and to help myself with my mental health. For all the things that I've been through right now, I am so happy. I just bought my first house. I have an amazing boyfriend.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And all that stuff. And I never thought that would have been possible. And I'm happy and I'm healthy. And I just want to throw it out there that like you can heal from these experiences. They will always be with you. And they will change you, but you can grow and heal from these experiences. And the biggest thing is that you have to be kind to yourself. You have to have self-care, and you have to be kind to yourself and understand that your feelings fucking matter. It's so important to try to seek help where you can instead of just trying to be tough and stuffing it down, because that's what's going to end up destroying you.
I totally agree, and it's so crazy that you even brought that up. I wish we had more time. One of my best friends, who actually Papes knows, she was on my second and last ship. She was my best friend. She was in my division, and she committed suicide. So a lot of the things that I do and a lot of the things that I'm involved in are because my entire world was turned upside down from this loss. And it stemmed from some stuff in the military that she did not seek help for. And I want to protect her by saying that I know there are resources that are so available, but those resources are not broadcasted in the way that they should be. I don't think that people know or have access to the amount of resources that are available. And that's another reason that I want to use this platform, is because the VA may not necessarily be able to see you in the next 90 days or whatever it was for Papes. I think it was 8 months that she could see her first counselor. And there, in the meantime, though, there are so many organizations that are like, hey, let's go scuba diving. Do you like horseback riding? Let's take you out and do that. Let's go camping. I mean, I personally have a nonprofit that outfits veterans with camping gear to start an outdoor lifestyle. And it's all of this stuff I've involved myself in because of her. And that's one of our intentions specifically for this podcast, is not just to tell stories, but to be a platform that talks about organizations and businesses that help in ways that maybe the VA cannot assist with. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And I would, in the next episode, like to talk about the therapy that you kind of got involved in that kind of worked for you.
I have so many resources.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, I'll compile a list of those and just let me know. And I would love to come back on and chat with you. You girls are awesome and so strong. Thank you so much for creating this platform for this, because it's so needed. And it's past time that we started speaking out about this stuff and bringing attention to it and just being there for each other. Because I think if all of us women band together, it's just going to be a force to be reckoned with, and it's going to be amazing.
it is going to be impossible to ignore for sure.
Yeah.
I thank you so much, Ashley. Seriously, those words were super kind. We want nothing but the best for everybody that's listening, and I can't wait to have you back. This was an awesome episode for me. I learned a lot, and I'm super thankful that you reached out to us and gave us a little bit of your time. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I mean, like all of your knowledge and background and everything and experiences, you're going to reach so many people based off of the things that you've gone through. And I think that's really important because maybe, people do feel like they're the only one in the world who's gone through something. But I think it's important to like spread that awareness that no, you're not the only one who's gone through that. Other people have, and there are ways to get through it and resources and other people you could talk to and things like that.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, you guys are so awesome. Thanks again for having me on, and I really look forward to coming back.
All right, so there are so many resources and so many stories that people have to share. So if you have any information that you feel like could benefit other veterans or active duty or whatever type of military members, send us an email. And thank you so much. We look forward to all the new stories and things we're going to be learning throughout this podcast. Thank you.